And then we get to hear it twice, always.
Yeah. It's such
I don't know how we got that feature. Oh.
There we go. That worked?
Ah, yeah. Christian parried the duplicate.
Yeah, there we go. Haha. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to TDR. What was it? Technical difficulties regularly, right?
Yeah. Now we've got now tonight's episode I think will be 3 dudes ranting.
Ooh, yeah. Here for your we're here with your
maybe it's more ruminating.
We feel way too strongly about that you can cancel us on Twitter for.
Wow.
You know, I've said for quite some time that there's not enough of that on YouTube and Twitch. As I've said, there really needs to be more like bunch of white guys ranting about trivial entertainment.
You may be surprised to find that that's a lot of people don't hold the opinion that there's not enough of that.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
But a lot of people might feel that
well,
there's
let
too
me
much
give
of that.
them a piece of my mind.
Wow. Today is our I don't know what we call these, review, talk back, the end of a game episode. We chat about the game that we just played, this time with some light pre-done audience interaction. Shout outs to the Discord.
Thanks to the Discord.
Yeah. Thanks to the Discord. Yeah, so really today we're just going to be chatting about 2400, the system. I think also just about how cool cyberpunk is overall.
Very cool.
And yeah, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I was thinking a good place to start is with the setting, right? With cyberpunk and all of the different options that you can have with it. And I'm gonna put Dan on the spot here because I know you're a fan.
Ooh.
Just rap about cyberpunk as a setting.
About
3 dudes
cyberpunk, yeah,
rapping. That's what it should be. 3 dudes rapping. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that's a good point. Yeah, cyberpunk is my favorite genre to do at this point, and I have really been struggling finding a game that lets me handle cyberpunk without like just suffering from what I think a lot of sci-fi RPGs suffer from, which is just an immense amount of rules. Second lightweight cyberpunk game that I've ran, I guess the second one also I've ran with Dan and Max as players, which is very exciting to me. And I don't know, I think this one 2400 did a great job of having just enough rules to where I could just sort of glue cyberpunk fixings on top of it, and giving all of that fluff in the rulebook that I think you need to get into a setting.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I've been a big fan of cyberpunk, and there was a particular point where Christian and I kind of mutually discovered that we were big fans of it. In coming at it in completely different eras. And when I was in college, read Gibson's Neuromancer. I think in the first episode, Vance, our viewer Vance, who's with us right at the moment, called me out for making a whole bunch of Snow Crash references. And of course, you're correct. I've read Snow Crash a couple times. I think it's like kind of the best of the breed. It's wonderful. There's a I'm a big fan of Bruce Sterling. Bruce Sterling's done really great stuff. And when I was in college, he had a big compilation, I think, called Inside the Reality Studio, that had like a whole bunch of short stories and kind of was a great primer. Yeah, I know, right? I love that. I don't have that with me right here at the moment, but and some of Sterling's short stories are great. So there was a dedicated. So this is the first, like, I've only played cyberpunk RPGs with Christian. Like this, you've seen all of the times that I've actually played. I think around 1990 there was a dedicated RPG, like you say, that was a big book RPG called Cyberpunk. Have you ever read that or played that? Yeah.
Yep. That one I haven't read or played, but I have investigated the new rehash of it, or the review of it, which is Cyberpunk Red, which I've heard good things about. Again, just kind of a lot of, like, the book is one of those big, like, D&D sized books, and I'm just like,
yep.
I know there's going to be a lot of rules about computers, and I don't know if I need to know all that.
Just like in real life, unfortunately. Not even a joke this time. Cyberpunk Red, I think, is one of the books I looked at the preview of on drive-thru and then did not purchase afterwards, which is very rare, because I think I was like, this looks like what you said, which is not a type of, not knocking that type of game, not a type of game I generally like.
Yeah.
Interesting. Vance, actually, at the moment is, so I'm looking at the chat here. Vance is reminding me that I mangled up Sterling's compilation is called Mirror Shades, which is also a great title. And that brings to mind the other compilation that I tangled up a bit. It's actually called, which is even better, it's called Storming the Reality Studio. I guess I should look up exactly who did those.
Much cooler.
Right?
Actually, also even cooler. I mean, the original title, I was like, that's one of the coolest titles I've ever heard, and the actual title is steps cooler.
Yeah, right? Who is edited by Larry McCaffrey is who that is, 1992. Yeah, when I saw that on the it's got a great, it's like got great creepy art on the cover from the people in San Francisco that like wire up actual dead animals to robots and have them fight, whatever the hell they're called.
What? Oh man, that we can't start talking about that, because that will definitely be the entire amount, the entire length of the show.
Oh no, you didn't.
I'm gonna tuck that one. I'm gonna tuck that one down for later, though. That's gonna require some additional Google searches.
Yeah.
Man, Cyberpunk now.
Yeah. Does any of the viewers know what that group is that I'm thinking of?
That sounds horrible.
Yeah, well, it's like a precursor to BattleBots. Actually, is that what the hell are they called?
BattleBots is Cyberpunk now. That's really
yeah. God, all these things are digging out of my brain. I don't know.
I
don't know what they are. Okay, my bad. I wasn't properly prepared to talk about that, unfortunately.
Who knew it would come up?
Is, I'm pretty deep into the cyberpunk lore at one point. So I was happy to have a game show up that used some of that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I slightly derailed that a little bit.
I mean, I'm just happy we got to the point where I could find out there are human beings who turn animals into robots to make them fight. I really like the 2400 rules. I bought the whole package on itch and read through most of them, and I liked all of them. And I like that it seems like you can kind of plug and play mechanics outside of the main die resolution mechanic, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Yeah, if anyone hasn't already, I really encourage you, if you like these kinds of one-pager games, to check out 2400. It's a whole collection, and it is just like the same rules with like a little extra setting and world-building attachments for just a wide range of sci-fi settings.
It's
Right,
really
there's a space one. There's one where you play like bionic animals. There's a Matrix one. There's like a dark one.
My favorite one was one where you live in a universe where everyone's like soul is uploaded to like a mainframe, and so your characters don't die. Their body gets destroyed, but then you just get it downloaded into a different body.
Yeah, and I was also impressed with the 2400 rules. I have, and this is kind of one of the things that I wanted to talk about, was these kinds of one-pager games, which I am addicted to buying because they're $3 on itch or something. And I'm like, what else am I going to do with $3? They're all really like hit or miss on if there's enough there other than just like a really funny idea. And I think 2400 really had a great balance of that. And I think this kind of pulls in one of the questions from the Discord. Shoutouts to Baki. Thank you so much for adding some questions.
Probably here right now.
Who's probably here right now. Talking about like educated, like where the rules fall short and dealing with the penalties and damage, because that's usually where these pagers fall short for me, is like they have like a dice mechanic but then nothing to tell you what to do with it. And 2400 has this really clean, like you're either hurt or not, or you're dead, and if you're hurt everything sucks and you break stuff, which I think really leads into cyberpunk, where stuff is such a big part of playing a role-playing game that's cyberpunk is the cool game. Having to make that choice, I mean, for me as the DM, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I'm curious how you guys felt that went whenever I like posed that, like, get brutally injured or break a thing. Because I thought that was great and really helped me like really pull the trigger on I'm just gonna mess you up.
I thought that worked well. Go ahead, Max.
Oh yeah, sorry. No. If you have more thoughts, go for it. Yeah.
I thought that worked pretty well, and I will say that it's the most minimalist rule set I've ever played with. So, and I tend to think, like, sort of doing D&D OSR type stuff, that I'm on the minimalist end of things. But this is the smallest, shortest rule set that I've ever played with, and it does actually fit on one sheet of paper. Like the whole thing with 2400 Inner City Blues, what we've been playing with, literally just sits on one sheet of paper. Digest size. You fold it over; it's 4 pages on one sheet. And I was like impressed by how much mileage you can get with such an incredibly small rule set. So that was pretty interesting. And I thought that the damage rules felt about right. So we'd get hit, and I could see here that one option would be just you're dead and out of the game. And like I was joking in the first episode, I actually did have multiple characters made up as replacements if I needed them, which is pretty old schooly. But then when equipment got wiped out, it felt I'm glad to still be in the game, but it felt pretty serious, as a matter of fact. So I actually thought that worked pretty well.
Yeah, that's basically exactly how I felt. And this is, I mean, I played a lot of these like one-page games, but they're almost always like jokes. Like they're not really meant to be like 2400 feels way more like a system. Like if you wrote a couple more pages, you'd have a complete system. My only complaint is that I felt a little confused as to which items should be breakable and which were not, which is maybe just due to the fact that my character sheet was in my notebook, just and written in pen because I'm an idiot. That was the one thing, because I agree with Dan that it felt like a really bad consequence, but it was cool to not be dead. And I thought that was a great balance.
Yeah, I agree with that, of like what can be breakable. And I would say, like, in terms of that, like, the damage rules, that's the only really part where I was, like, super fuzzy on. Because and the kind of metric I went with is, in the rules, it talks about bulky quality being something, an item can be bulky, meaning it, like, takes up a lot of space and you have to carry it with both hands, right? Like Dan's character's deck or a suit of armor.
Yeah.
And it mentions that you can add the bulky quality to break it for damage. And so that's kind of where I drew that. I think it's in the synth skin when it's talking about the fake skin you can get. You can get it armored, which adds the bulky quality but lets you break it. And so that's kind of how edge and
interesting
items of a certain size or of a certain like a cyber limb felt appropriate to break because it was critical to your character and makes sense, right? Even when you think about it logically. And maybe that's the rule, just like the rule of does it make sense that this would break if you get shot? Yeah, but that's kind of what I was thinking when dealing with that kind of damage stuff.
I like that. I mean,
and I will say the deck,
you could really just... Oh, sorry, go ahead, yeah.
I'll just say that the deck is specifically called out in the rules as one thing that specifically it's bulletproof. It's in a bulletproof case, which is bulky. So that's specifically part of that character type that their deck is automatically like that.
I wonder if you could just flag an item as significant. And if an item can be both significant and breakable, it's like you can find a way in the narrative to make it make sense that that thing broke, and you suffer. You then definitely have a consequence.
That's good,
because I can definitely see the instinct to game like, well, I'm carrying this big, stupid, like, what did I have? A big taser thing, but I don't give a shit about it. Can I get that broken? Like, I hate this thing. And I like the idea of being able to avoid gaming that by having to call the item significant to you,
Yeah.
Interesting.
Plus, as you might have noticed in the last game we played, I have a just intense hoarding, like, rat-like desire to pick up everything in role-playing games and shove it in my little pocket. So I was really happy to see that be a system mechanic.
Yeah,
that's nice. I will say, that it's funny because the damage, injury, hindrance thing is actually not super well. It's for a one sheet rule set. It's not super clearly connected on page 2 because it says, like, in the basic mechanic, it says for this roll, if you're risking death, you die. That's it. And then way down further the page, it says defense, say how one of your items or cyber limbs breaks to turn a hit into a brief hindrance. Broken gear is useless until repaired. And so I feel like for me, every time I go to that page to try to sync that up, I'm a little bit confused about what it's saying at the top versus what it's saying at the bottom. But I mean, we figured it out, I think.
That's a good point. And I think that kind of goes to Vance's question in the chat here, which is that challenge and consequence system that I think is like the other half of the whole 2400 is like, because the way I interpreted that was if death is an option and you fail, you're dead no matter what. But you can break stuff to avoid. You can break stuff if the consequence is like injury, right? Or if it's roll in that middle space where you get a minor setback, right? That is then, if it's death, you die or you can break something and live. As I say that, I implemented that exactly, but that is kind of my the theoretical thought of it.
That is also how I read it, and I don't think we ever had, like, I don't think you ever declared death is on the line. That didn't ever happen in the game, right, Christian?
It might have once.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
I just scrubbed it from my head. What were you going to say there,
we also
Matt,
might have been joking about it, so I wonder if, like, the consequences and damage, or just the consequences roll was really meant to be both the rolling and the damage mechanic, and that the idea of breaking equipment is just kind of thrown in the way it is because it's like, here's one idea of what consequences other than death could be that are still significant, because I can definitely see when looking at the negative consequences mechanic is that it kind of feels weird on, like, it's a lot on the DM to call this one death. Like, that's a big thing to say. So I wonder if you just never really get to death, and that you kind of need these intermediate ones up until it's like, well, clearly you failed a bunch of rolls or you're trying something crazy. Now death makes sense. Like, how many times can you call for a make this roll or die roll in a game?
Yeah,
a lot depending.
Well, it depends. That's true.
Because I I read it the same way Christian did, and that's actually why I made the backup characters. Because I actually in advance, I actually foresaw a lot of
funny
roll or die results. So I actually expected that to happen quite commonly. Like if I was running it out of the box, I probably would have had a lot of death results probably.
That's really interesting. You're right. Yeah.
That's where I think like the setting, knowing the setting and having a good theme helps. For me, at least, like knowing that it was cyberpunk, like I feel like a cyberpunk game has kind of a flow to it that starts like not low stakes, but like lower stakes of, you're breaking into a smaller security place where there's just some backwoods guards in a swamp. Like that's probably you're not going to die there. That wouldn't be very interesting. And probably it doesn't make sense if you're hardened criminals. But when you're dealing with private security on a heavily protected and very expensive boat, they'll probably try to just kill you and not even look twice at you, which helps kind of like build up the consequences to like starting off, probably not death, and until you get to those really
interesting
high situations, which I think, at least when I try to think about cyberpunk as a session, that's kind of what I'm going for.
I mean, I can totally sympathize with dialing up. I guess that's a referee decision to dial up the drama like that, which makes total sense. And it reminds me a lot of Paul's now Fearful End system, where his rulebook specifically says, like in a 4-hour convention game, something horrible happens in the first hour, you're going to draw one of the insanity cards. In the second hour, you're probably going to draw two, and three in the third, and fourth in the fourth hour. So I can make sense of that.
Yeah. I do agree, though, that it is a lot on the GM. And going back to the like consequences question, that's something that I do want to like give props to this game for, because I feel like failing forward and like making sure, and hard lines, right, are kind of things that or hard moves, right? Not hard lines. Are things that I get bandied about in the like indie RPG scene, and I've never really been able to like wrap my head around what the heck does that even look like. But just having the rule in the book on the paper be set consequences before anybody even rolls a die, because the risk reward of the roll is what you're rolling about, really helped me kind of grasp that and be like, well, yeah, are you going to, like, is a failed hacking roll you don't get in, or is a failed hacking roll you trigger security and you get what you want?
Yeah. Maybe you could. So I'm not sure people are totally aware of exactly what the mechanic is. Maybe Christian, you could describe exactly what the little minimalist rolling mechanic is, even.
Oh yeah. So if I guess we didn't really cover it too much in the live play, but so for every roll you have a skill. It starts at a D6, and your character enhances it just up a die type, going up to presumably 220. And when you make the roll, you compare it to a chart, a success chart. And a 1 and 2 is a critical failure. A 3 and 4 is a success with a setback, or maybe a failure with no consequences. And a 5 and 6 is a success. and it encourages you, if you get higher than a 5 or 6, to increase the severity of the success, right? So if you rolled like a 10, that's a big success, and you did really well. Although that isn't outlined in the actual rules.
We mostly rolled 1s and 2s, of course, so we got to experience that end of the system quite a lot. My
a big part of that.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Just a big part of that I wanted to add is it tells you the main role of the DM in this system is to then set the consequences. Say, you're encouraged also to fully explain what happens if you fail, right? And I tried my best at that. There were times I didn't do it too well, but saying, right, I think to Dan when you were hacking, oh yeah, if you fail, you're going to trigger security, or something bad will happen, or it will take more time if you do poorly, which I think is really great. I might do that for all of my dice rolling games from here on out.
Yeah.
Interesting. Sorry, I'm really talking over everyone tonight. I'm still on these painkillers from my wisdom teeth extraction. I'm going to blame that. I have a big issue with mechanics where the DM has to decide or make something up for every single player roll. That is also, I think, a feature of Apocalypse World. That is why I can never manage to run that game for or variations of that for very long. This felt nicer. I mean, obviously, I wasn't DMing, but this felt nicer than something like that, because at least it codifies it in a way that, the person's making a roll, there probably is some consequence to them not getting what they clearly want something, and so there'll be some consequence to them not getting it. So at least kind of eases you into that a little more, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas I think Apocalypse World uses that DM moves. It's been a long time now, where you kind of have to make something up wholesale, and the DM is required to relate how it is to the roll, whereas here it feels like the player is sort of maybe more in control of that.
Yeah, I like
having the consequences, though. Yeah.
Yeah, I like this system a lot more for my money than the Apocalypse World system, because it feels like I'm always in the perspective of the player character. I don't have to. Okay. For some reason, Apocalypse World flips that around, and now I'm dealing with this meta narrative situation. It's kind of reversing that to me. And I mean, frankly, this 2400 system felt very, very old school gaming of the referee is in charge of the world. I'm in charge of my decisions. So, Christian is putting forth here's the things that could possibly happen with your next action. I get to decide whether I pursue it or not. And that felt very old school. That felt very natural. And it felt very staying in the character and perspective of my PC. And I will say, I was almost half surprised for a game of this recent vintage that it doesn't have these player take control of the narrative mechanics. I'm kind of accustomed to almost any newer game, like Apocalypse World or something, to have some kind of formalized rule for now it's Dan's turn to take over and describe what the setting and the environment is. And I'm not super fond of those because it throws me out of the perspective of my PC. And this felt very natural, and it also felt that it helped the minimalism of it, that you don't have to have a bunch of formalized rules for now it's Max's turn to take control of the scene. And the roles are very clearly delineated. The referee, Christian, describes the world, and the players decide what you do about it. And for me, that's classic RPG stuff.
That's I think it's really cool that this system Dan described as old school, because when I read it, I thought this would be a system Dan wouldn't like. But I have trouble describing games that do have those narrative control mechanisms as rules light. To those in my head, those are kind of I know the rules aren't die rolling or math rules, but to me those are rules heavy, and rules light means just the die resolution mechanic. That's one thing I like about the game Quest, which is what we're playing in our our regular group, it does not really have. It just has, that's what it has. It has the die rolling mechanic, and then doesn't have that narrative control thing for the most part.
Yeah. Now with Quest, you have. I feel like there's a little bit of a hiccup in that. That I think, Max, when you're running it, you have a little bit. You find it just a little bit challenging sometimes. That there's the middle ground on the roll. There's the clearly success range. You roll a d20, success is above 10. Clearly, failure is like below 6 or something like that. And there's this middle ground where after the roll happens, you, Max, the referee, have to come up with, well, it could be this kind of quasi bad thing or this kind of quasi bad thing. Which one do you want to pick? And you're making a decision after the roll's been made. Right, there you go.
Yeah, it's a tough choice. So if you get, I think you're right, I think it's between 6 and 10, although I always forget the range despite the fact that I've been running this game for like a year now. It is, the DM comes up with 2 things, and then the player has to pick which one they like. That does irk my having to come up with something on every roll. And you're right, it does give narrative control to the player in a way there. Although it's in a limited way, I guess I'll say. You do have to choose one of those 2 things. You don't get what you want. And I mean, that's one, not to make this about Quest, that's one where it's kind of impressed me. Like, I still am too lazy to really want to do that every time. But the player reaction to having to make that choice is often so good that it makes the effort worth it for me. Which is kind of, okay, I'll bring it back around. I can do this. That's what I liked about the consequences here, though. It felt good to me. Like, it felt fun to fail because of the way those consequences were. It was fun to me to be like, uh-oh, my equipment's gone. I'm just like a broken robot now. There's nothing I can do. Like, having those consequences felt like, even though it wasn't giving it to me to choose what the bad thing or the partial success was, it kind of felt that way of like, it had a similar feel to me, I guess, where you get a good player reaction out of the roll.
Yeah, I tend to like those the ambiguous rules. I know more than either of you do. I think because it helps train me.
Christian's the maximalist rules advocate in all forms. I think. Yeah,
a lot of them, because it really helps me. And I think 2400 did a similar thing with the consequence setting of just eliminating roles that aren't interesting. Because if I have to think about what a tough choice is for this role, and I'm just like, nothing is interesting here, I'm just going to throw the roll out. Because, I'm not interested in like doing just a hard fail generally in my games. Unless the hard fail is also interesting. And the consequences in this especially helped me do that. And as I got into it, I felt like I could. The fact that it was so light, I felt like very empowered to just make the consequences whatever the hell I wanted. Like, maybe it's time, maybe it's someone notices you, maybe you don't look as cool when you do this thing,
I really think by the last session you were really flowing with that too. I felt really good about basically all the roles coming up at that point.
Yeah. One of the things that I like, so there's, again, in a game this incredibly short, I'm impressed that apparently this is basically all you need for a role-playing game. And there's one single paragraph here, and then the players and the ref will be working together to, agree that this is a reasonable way for the world to work. There's one single paragraph in the rules titled "Running the Game." You get one paragraph on how to run the game.
Gotta have one.
What it says there, and I think, and it's funny because I think these are all legitimate, valuable things that took me possibly decades to learn. So I was like, that's great. I wish I'd known this. A long time ago. One of them was, like Christian said, the players only roll to avoid risks. Yeah, okay, I can see that. That's great. And then the running the game section says, establish as a group lines not to cross in play. Great. Encourage players to veto content as needed. Great. And again, that's very minimalist. I got to admit, it's funny because both in a lot of role-playing games and the improvisation book that we reviewed on Wandering DMs the other week has, references to very sizable, very long safety tools. And I fear sometimes And it's actually something that we said to players on the Big Bad show that we were doing. And sometimes I worry that itself is kind of gatekeeping. That all of a sudden there's a large number of formal rules that people have to digest, and it actually comes off as kind of scary that you need this much formalized security stuff around it. So I personally like this. I say, players, if there's something that you really don't like that bothers you, tell me and we'll veto it. Fast forward or pause or rewind, redo for both pacing and safety. That's reasonable. I'm willing to say that. That's fine. And then it says, and then beyond that, it says, present dilemmas and problems you don't know how to solve. Move the spotlight to give everyone time to shine. This is all great. And then, where's the part?
I like that. And then under Dan supports minimalism even for safety rules.
I want to get the point across and the point's the game, right? The point, I don't want to have a whole session 0 where we're just talking about the game. I want the new players to experience the actual game and not talk about the game, frankly. And then it says, if killed, make a new character to be introduced as soon as possible. Favor inclusion over realism. So get a player back into the play, even if it's not reasonable that they would show up. And I think you guys have seen me struggle with that with D&D over the years, right? There was a point where I said, you died, make up a new character, even if the fight's still going on, you're back in the game as soon as your sheet's done. And it took me an embarrassingly long amount of time. I have had people sitting out for an hour or two, because their character died. It's happened. I've done that to Paul in the past. Your character died, and I'm looking for an appropriate scene to bring a new character in. And they even did that on Critical Role at one point. Someone died, and then they had one of the actors just hanging around for a whole episode, and they never got in the episode.
That's
looking for the right moment. And so this, right? And I feel like this advice of favor inclusion over realism is just this little nugget that I needed at a much earlier stage.
That's a great rule for role playing in general. Yeah.
all parts of role playing, I think. Yeah.
I didn't read that section of the. Clearly too long rules even for me to read the whole thing for this. I missed that running the game section.
Yeah.
Well, you weren't running the game, so you really didn't need that.
So I could skip it. You're right. I should have skipped it. I assumed it contained lore information that I was not meant to have. So about the coffee maker to sentient robot upgrade process, I assume.
That's great.
I will say that do you have a different kind of going to a new point here? My issue, I do still have an issue with the consequence style rules for combat. Although I thought you handled it really good. I think once you get into combat, it just feels gamier to me, maybe, and I just don't want it to be a narrative like that. Like, obviously, it's funny that ThinkBot did a really stupid thing and got absolutely dominated for it. And that's probably realistic too, because he got shot a million times. But it's like, I was like, I kind of thought we were starting combat or something like that, which is just my perspective on it. And I could definitely see how people would prefer the rules this way. But for me, when it gets into combat, I just want it to be gamier, I guess.
Interesting. I'll say a couple minutes ago when we were chatting about how many death is on the line rolls should there be, and William in the chat said, well, it depends on if you stand up from cover in front of a killbot.
A lot of people saw that scene very differently than I did, apparently. So powerful words from William.
Yeah.
Good advice for all of us, I think.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you there, Max. And it's something that I have been really trying to practice as I play more of these types of shooter games, of making a combat, because I think there's advantages to it, despite the obvious disadvantage of not, it's tough. Like the issue that you had, right, where you're like, are we in combat? Is this a combat situation? You're not sure. Because I think it gives you the flexibility of having more dynamic scenes that involve combat that that rules tend to slow down. Like, I can imagine if we're doing like a grid-based battle, right? That combat scene in the second to last episode, right, where Andy's character is sneaking ahead and basically doing most of the combat while everyone else is distracting them and doing something else. Like, having Dan and Colleen's characters, like, hacking a robot and building a new killbot and opening the gates could take 3 or 4 turns, and that is just not super exciting.
That was the example. As soon as I said that was the example that popped into my head from this game, where I was like, but you know what? It did work really well for when they were doing that. So that's a good point. That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do think it's really tough to like set the scene and in your explanations as the DM to like really hammer in to everybody if they're in the area, like, this is a hot situation. Like, someone's trying to kill you right now, no matter what you're doing.
Right. It's funny. I'm fiddling with my own system as I always am, and I've been thinking about that. Like, what is how do you tell someone combat has started in a game that's supposed to be more narrative? And it is bizarre. Like, it starts when the one guy gets shot to shit and is dead now. Like, that's how you know. That clearly signified it.
Wow. One thing I think you handled a concern that I have for cyberpunk games is, how do you handle the hacking, right? How do you handle the oh God, now what am I supposed to call it these days? I really don't want to call it the metaverse, right? But the cyber sphere, right? The different plane of reality when you're hacking when you're cyber hacking the cyber world. And a concern is you might need to have different rules for it. And here the minimalist rules kind of take that off the page. I knew exactly what the mechanic was going to be like going into it. And the other thing you worry about is under the don't split the party policy is it's sort of inherently a one-person solo job. You're not interacting with people usually when you do that. And I think that worked really much better than I expected. It was short, right? There were a couple moments where my character was off in the hacking world. It seemed short. It seemed to the point. We got there, and frankly, the one thing that to me helped the most, Christian, is that you'd prepared a handout of the user interface, and that immediately dropped me into this different perspective of what it looked like instead of the real world. And just that one little handout you have, and it just took a second where I actually had to like mentally parse what I was looking at, and I was confused just for a second, and it really did a fantastic job for me to throw me onto now William wants me to call it the information superhighway, which is great.
That's acceptable.
I really felt like I was in the pipes. I really did. So I thought that worked super well, and I would recommend other people like just have a little handout of like what it looks like, because that all of a sudden really put me right into the milieu.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I'm glad that you felt like it worked. That system, that tree, is something I stole from Cyberpunk Red. I got the quick start rules, and that's their quick start hacking. Is you set up a tree that's like a server, and each level is different, has a different piece of information or something on it, which I just think is a brilliant way to do that fast hacking of those like action scenes like you described, Dan, where usually a hacker will go and they'll hack, and then 2 hours later in real world time they'll be done, and in game time it's been 50 seconds. And how do you reconcile that? I think William mentioned in the chat Shadowrun ages ago, and Shadowrun really suffers from where hackers take like 7 or 8 actions per every meat space action, and it's just
there you go.
unbearable.
Meat space.
There you go. I haven't played Shadowrun, but it's coming back that I think I've read or someone told me in the distant past about that problem. So I think that's exactly what I was concerned about going into this game.
Yeah. And I think when I think about Cyberpunk 2, that's kind of, I think that also feeds into like just the way I do Cyberpunk is, to me, right, there's kind of like 2, maybe 2.5 types of hacking. There's like the hacking where, you, like in the last few episodes, where you're like, I want to hack into this control module and take control over all the bots. And I'm like, great, that's one action. Where it's like a dice roll or something like that. Then there's the more like exploratory one, which is what we went through with that handout in the tree, which I think it's an amount of time, but it's not like the only thing happening, but it is an important scene to play. And then there's the kind of, I think, the Snow Crash style hacking of like, and now we're in the information superhighway, and we're all there, and we're flying around, and we're our avatars and stuff like that, which to me, I think is the easiest way to play it, where you just make sure everybody gets in. Make sure everybody's in, and then it's just another set.
And then just the game, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Yeah. I like it felt special. It felt it felt special that my character was doing that and other people weren't. So it felt like a nice spice, and you would want it to be very short if that was the case.
Yeah, generally I agree that hacking, I think, should be short and should make the hacker feel cool, because that's why you're playing a hacker character, right?
If you had everyone as avatars, right, then you could go. Then it would be a different thing if you were like actually interacting with NPCs in cyberspace or interacting with an AI would be kind of the next obvious thing. But that kind of interaction role play, that would go much longer, and you would need everybody to be part of it if you're doing that.
Yeah.
That's cool. Sorry.
The like solution to that I've never actually run, but the one I think about all the time is you just have the hacker have to move around in real space. And then you have kind of a funny scene where the hacker is in this alternate world. They're in like a digital beach, dealing with like digital baristas that represent different nodes of information, and all their friends are fighting security and killbots in like a grungy office hallway, right?
That's really funny.
I like that.
I would love to see hacking rules like that for combat. I would like to see a system where combat is one person's of the group's specialty. I feel like that scratches a particular adventure movie kind of itch. I wonder if that could be done. It's a random thought. But I like, I was thinking about when Dan said, well, if it's the thing that I do that makes me look cool, it has to be short because nobody else gets to do it, which is cool. And I love when a person, like when one of the players gets to do that, and it would be cool if that were combat too. Or at least I play with a lot of people who seem to not like to do combat. So I'd love to, it'd be really cool to have a way to have combat be one person's cool thing.
Interesting. Interesting. I mean, like you can go back to the Tunnels and Trolls game, which is like the second ever RPG, where like the combat is it is abstracted to the point where it's just one roll. You walk in a room, you're fighting a troll. Roll one die, and it's over one way or the other.
Wow. Damn.
Wow.
That's less complicated than Snakes and Ladders there or whatever.
Yeah, right. Right.
What like other? I'm not a big cyberpunk is related to the other genre I hate, sci-fi. Ugh. I assume we all feel the same way about that. What other than hacking is like the cyberpunk? To me, it's like people like robots. Yeah, X-card sci-fi is bad.
Yeah, X-carding that. Bullshit.
Rewind. I'm going to rewind that.
In Dan's safety tools, there's a BS card. I'm just like, I'm throwing the bullshit card.
What other than like hacking is like I guess mechanically, to me, it's like hacking and cybernetics, I guess, or at least that's what it is in the two games I've also played with Christian. And, that's what it is in Deus Ex to me, too, which I guess people would say is cyberpunk. Are there other, are those the two things? It's funny that neither of those things are mechanically really in the game, if that is the case.
I think, mechanically speaking, it's hacking is one. I think cybernetics is another.
Okay, I guess cybernetics is mechanically in the game. I had cybernetics.
And for me, and what I think the biggest one is gear, because I think, for me at least, when I think of a cyberpunk role playing game, it's you start off usually as like just the worst possible criminals, and you make money, and you spend that money on cool stuff that you then get to use. And just having cool and interesting tools that have one use, and then you do use it for that thing, and you're like, that's rad. I spent $10,000 on this air tank that's installed into my chest so I don't breathe toxic gas, and now I get to use it. Yeah, I don't know. What would you say?
Akira motorcycles. Akira motorcycles. Yeah, I like that. And again, see, it's funny how it feeds. How you're right that the cyberpunk setting works really well with these rules. And again, that feeds like surprisingly well into the oldest of old school D&D, where your characters were all pretty vanilla. You didn't have too many options to pick from, and basically all of your variety came from your equipment, your magic gear. So the distinction between the characters in old school D&D was mostly who's got the intelligent sword and what kind of magic armor do I have, and do I have a crystal ball, and do I have a medallion of ESP, stuff like that. And so it's weird how familiar this felt to me, and it felt reasonable that you could gain it and lose it. I'm not literally permanently crippling my character. The gear will come and the gear will go. And that felt like a reasonable game mechanic. I like that a lot.
That's cool, and definitely felt to me like a variation on the magic sword style thing, where obviously that's the thing I'm never going to let break or let out of my hands or sight.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think the first time we broke something, so I think the very first time we broke something, I had this moment of like real horror. Like, oh my God, right? That's the worst thing that can possibly happen to your character. You lost your equipment. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I guess that's what that's supposed to feel like. But the rules do say I will be able to buy it back later if I get some money. And I was like, okay, that's how this game's going to work. That's pretty reasonable.
It did instantly make me want to start hoarding cash.
That was very funny. Definitely.
Like, I know this game isn't even probably going to go on this long. I'm still not going to let this $1 go.
Yeah. As an aside, that's one thing I really like about the Intersystem Blues is the money of everything costs about 1 credit, and if it's something smaller than what you would spend a credit on, don't bother. Which I think is a great way of having I want to buy lots of cool stuff without having to keep track of like what fraction of 10,000 euros is this gun. Like, I don't want to know.
I also like that, right? I read the rules and I was like, this is great. Everything's you start off with a smartphone, which my character immediately threw over the board on the ship, plus 2 credits, and everything on this suggested gear list costs 1 credit. So a cyber eye, cyber ear, grenades, whatever, rifle costs 1 credit. I like that a lot. In play,
that was great.
I feel like at the end of our session, I feel that we ran into a problem with that then we were talking about high-end cars, right? Like the Akira motorcycle or these high-end cars. And all of a sudden, none of us had any idea what the cars should cost.
Yeah.
I think clearly our instinct was the cars weren't going to be 1 credit. But then having said that, then what are they? And I think on the player's end, I think we were thinking like maybe 2 or 5 or 10 credits. And then I think Christian said like a new car would be 100 credits, and we all lost our minds. And I think and we
You could
could,
buy
if
so
we
many
were going to come back to
cybernetic
this,
eyes.
right? Exactly. And if we were going to retcon this, I think if we go back to the last episode, I think right at the end, I think Christian said you each get like 16 credits for each of 20 cars or something like that. Actually, I do have that written down. Yeah. Right. So we get 120 credits total. And I will say that in the rules under advancement, and I just noticed it says advancement after a job increases skill. And if you get paid, all gain D6 credits. So I feel like maybe a little bit, right? So a little bit of sketching out like what higher end things would be. Maybe that's an expansion. Like, what is a car? What is a tank? What is a ship? Because those things can't all be one credit.
Yeah.
And obviously, Andy really, really wanted a cool motorcycle. Is that a credit?
Cool. Yeah.
I definitely, that's something if I were to use this system for longer term games that I would want. That's most of, I think, what my prep work would be of like sketching out a loose economy. But I feel confident that I could do that in the thing. Because, probably a normal car would cost the same as a robotic eye. But high end, maybe it goes up.
Makes sense.
I think there's also, and I'm not totally on board with this idea, but I think it's one that the game does present of a credit and money being different, where a credit is a mechanical thing that you do to improve your character, and your character also has some money that they buy the stuff that they use to buy uninteresting things. Like, do they own a sports car that they take to car shows? Sure, why not? Do they have a big van that's armor-proof that has a bunch of drones in it? That costs credits.
Interesting.
I can see that.
It does hurt what I think one thing people for whatever reason really like, which is just owning luxury items inside role-playing games as rewards. For whatever reason, I think that's always a fun reward to seek, and that does kind of hurt that mechanically,
But do people ever buy those luxury items, or do they steal them?
Now, in Dan's game, we would traditionally buy them because it was the only way we could carry all the money. So it was sort of that's a good point. You're right. Maybe it is usually stealing. We had to convert many thousands of gold pieces into a small weight. I definitely have. Quest also does this. I definitely have liked the idea of having economic systems that are not try to one-to-one with any sort of in-game currency, It kind of matches the real world where there's all sorts of currencies and they don't all count in different places, but you can still count things as valuable or worth someone, someone would accept this as payment for an item in some way,
Yeah. Like how Fate Core has a resources skill that just is a very loose liquid money at any given time.
Interesting.
Should we let me hit
let me touch before we get too far out. Let me just hit one thing that William threw in the chat a couple minutes ago. We were talking about breaking the equipment being pretty useful in this game, and William was saying that he can see that breaking mechanic in a fantasy setting. Seems like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser lose their stuff and have it back in the next story. And the funny thing is I actually struggle with that in D&D. I want that. And now it's mostly me just talking to William at this point, because I was actually, William and I were emailing the other day, right? And I shared with him the fumble rules that I currently use with you guys when we play, D&D at HelgaCon or whatever. And so I have this really little minimalist chart. You roll a natural 1, and then you roll another d20. You go to this chart, and 1, it's like you hit yourself. 2, you hit a friend. 3, I think you fall down. 4, you break your weapon, and 5, you just drop your weapon. I think that's what I have there. And so that's me trying to work in breaking your weapons, which absolutely should happen once in a while, rarely in a medieval fight. And I have not, and I was walking around just yesterday, I have still not found any good way that feels right to me to break the armor. And I know some people have this like shields must be broken rule, whereby you get hit and at the player's option, they can decide to sacrifice their shield to avoid the hit. And again, to me that feels like the player narrative control thing that doesn't feel right. It feels like when you break your shield in real life, you are not going to be in control of that. It's going to be a horrible thing that you didn't intend, and you're not happy about it. So I actually don't. I've never, and so you could think about like having a critical hit damages the opponent's armor, but that's never going to make enough difference for the attacker to be interesting. So I agree that I kind of feel like classic D&D needs more equipment being broken, and I have struggled with that and never really found a perfect way to work that in.
What I really liked about it in 2400 was how simple it was too, because I feel like a lot of this equipment breaking kind of thing also has a tendency to lead towards a lot, management or like number crunching stuff. And I loved how quick and narrative this one was. It either is broken and it absolutely is useless to you, or it works perfectly fine. That was my favorite part of that. It's just something you have or you don't have.
Yeah,
agree with
as
that.
opposed to like ability or something
like that. Yeah, which is often even the shield, that kind of shields will be shattered rule. I love that that's the actual title for it. Rule also kind of feels a little management-y then, because then my shield's gone and now I got to mark down that I've got to erase the damn thing from my sheet, and I got to mark down that I got to go buy another shield. Whereas here I don't even need to. Yeah. I just put a little marker on the stuff that was broken. I didn't even need to. It was fine that I wrote it in pen. That was great.
And I will say, that's another thing I learned in our last D&D campaign, actually, because I think, Christian, you had a magic shield, right? And at some point I rolled into one of those rules, and I think it was like a +1 shield, and I think when on the one hit I reduced the bonus by 1 or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you were still carrying it around, right? And you were still carrying it around. We were debating how to get the +1 back. And in retrospect, I was like, I'm not happy with this incremental damaging. I should just take it off the table. It should just be broken and shattered and gone, would be more dramatic and a clearer. And maybe even if I make it harder, I think I also came to that same thing, is it's better to just have it be either fine or gone. And I think I learned that the last time we were playing D&D together.
Yeah, I even really like, and I think, oh, sorry, yeah. Go ahead.
Because then it gives you that of like, you can decide to break it totally but like if you feel like not doing that much damage, you can just say, oh, it's broken, but you can fix it. So you still have that ability to tweak it and modulate it.
Yeah.
The idea that the broken equipment just comes back automatically, that's what I really think I like about it. And I think fits in that like Fafford and Grey Mouser thing where, yeah, they lost their weapons all the time, but they always just had another one ready to go. Like, it wasn't like, it didn't feel like it, it didn't feel it doesn't feel management-y that way, I guess is what, yeah. Should we hit the last, we had one more question in Discord, I think.
Yeah.
Which was how much you had prepared versus how much you'd used, like interested in how the GM notes were structured.
Yeah. So it's kind of funny that question came up because a friend of ours, Andre, messaged me and we were chatting about that recently too.
Me too. Yep.
Sorry, that was Rebel.
Yeah. So for this game in particular, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I just, as a DM, prepare my notes. So for this game, I had I outlined the job, which was inspired by that real news story of the cargo ship that went aflame in the middle of the ocean full of luxury cars. And I kind of had everything figured out with Metal Mouth, and then maybe adding an extra element of it, of they have to find out where the ship is, and the few little, there were a couple of bonuses there, like the extra money that you got from hacking, or if you decided to, there were other ways you could get the cars off the ship if you got a bit creative, or explored the ship a bit more. So those things I kind of hashed out right at the beginning. And I usually, when I create like a session, like a game like this, where it's like beginning to end kind of one-shot style, I usually chart it out with like an arc, right? Of like, first they do this, and then some stuff happens, and eventually they'll get here, and then it ends, somewhere else. So for those, I usually have like nodes or scenes that I know are going to happen. For this, right, it's the negotiation with Metalmouth, the breaking into the Everglades research park, and then on the boat itself. For those, I have a general idea of what I want to happen, right? Of whether it's I challenge them with some guards, or I know like it's going to be a little bit risky, or it's going to be very risky. And I kind of spend some time outlining what that looks like. And past that, though, I usually leave it very open. Like in the Everglades Park, I knew that there were 2 guards. There are some alligators there messing around, and that's really it. I knew that they were underfunded and undersupported. So everything else that came out from that was just sort of inspired by there are 2 guards. Nobody really cares about them. They barely care about their jobs. And there are some alligators, because I just thought it would be fun to attack you with alligators.
Hey, it's the Everglades.
Yeah. Yeah, and then for the boat, which I imagined more as like a multiple elements, right, a multi-section kind of scene, I had kind of a sense of what the boat looked like, what was on each level, each deck, and how you would navigate it, and the different ways that you could get cars off the ship. Cool. And that kind of how I generally prep my notes is that way, where I'll have like overarching ideas written down somewhere, and during a session or an individual session, I'll like hand write out specific points that I want to hit, that I use to then inspire what I riff off of. So I'd say most of it got used, because I don't really prep everything down to the letter. There were things that I thought you might do that you didn't. Yeah, I hope that kind of speaks to my note and prepping style a little bit.
Cool.
Is that?
I'll throw a quick shout out. We have a new viewer, Lucy WH. Welcome, Lucy. And we are currently recapping our recent cyberpunk RPG that we're playing for a couple of weeks. So I think we probably all 3 of us possibly see what
recap episode. Yeah. The end of one.
That. We have archives of the shows we played. I think on our YouTube channel will still be there. YouTube Wandering DMs. So here we are doing our analysis of a game, and yes, we are very serious about it.
Yeah.
So Christian, how many total pages is that? Like your notes would be like total length would be what?
Let me grab my notebook and I'll tell you.
Yeah, grab it. So as you do that, right on, it's funny because Andre and I were also having the same chat, and I said to him, I probably over prepare, and I always write really extensive notes that I might not recommend that other people do the same, but mine tend to go on and on.
Yeah, so it is like this size notes, I'd say 3 pages of stuff that I are like those very well fleshed out rules, and then like a page per session where I'll write notes during the session and then just have my outline of what's going to happen.
Cool. Yep, that's the way to do that.
Cool. That's basically the amount. I also tend to over prepare, but in the same I tend to over prepare, and then I'll just keep writing different scenes that I think might come up, which is also, I think, a bad idea. Yeah, that's cool. It felt very, I'm always impressed, incidentally, by Christian's games. They always feel like Christian wrote the entire thing down, and I can't believe it's only 2 pages of notes. I played an extended. I think we've played in multi-session games where afterwards I was like, it was cool that Christian read that book and used the plot of that book as our entire game, and it went flawlessly.
Yep. Max, I gotta say, so this is like a little personal thing coming in here. So you
let's get real personal. Now that we got people coming in, let's start talking about.
I'm gonna really call Max out here. You once did a stage show here in New York with our friend Steven, which I just adored. And you guys had this one joke, right? That like all of our, like we have a whole bunch of friends that do improv that we talk about a lot. And then the joke on stage was, well, it's like improv, except that we wrote it in advance. Like, what is that? I guess we need a name for that. It should be primprov. And then the primprov thing totally lives rent free in my head, and I really love that. So we do. So I think Max and I do a lot of primprov. We will do a whole lot of advanced preparation for improvisational gaming.
That's a great way to describe. Yeah, it's a lot of preparation, and then I improv the entire game. That's really how I feel like I prepare. Is that I have a lot of notes and I use none of them. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I guess Andre is just running the gamut because he also asked me about that, and I always struggle to tell people how I prepare for games because I often feel like I feel like I prepare a lot and then make everything up, and I don't know how to describe that. I'm glad Dan and I are on the same boat, and I'd someday love to see Dan's notes for scenes that we never got to play in various games.
I do have a tendency to go into conditionals of like, if the players do this, then do this. But if they do this, then this happens. But if they do this, but then if this happens, do this. And and sometimes I wonder how useful that is because it can just go on forever. Obviously,
yeah,
just an infinite switch statement, basically.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I definitely also like to draw a lot of maps, if only because I have a really bad, like, I guess, topographical mind or whatever. Like, it's hard for me to imagine what spaces look like, so I really like drawing maps that relate to my notes so I can have some spatial awareness of it. I think Christian is much better at thinking in that way, and so doesn't have the reliance on maps to his notes, but...
Yeah, I maps I always wing. I'm always like, I guess this is what this scene looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do, like William says, I actually do have a whole lot of advanced arguments in my head. That actually is a thing.
I better make sure I have the full decision tree of this argument ready.
Yeah. Oh, I've got the perfect snappy comeback if they ever say this.
Great.
Were there other? Did we hit everything?
Final.
All right. Well, let me throw this out. So it was very helpful that if anybody wants to know about this horrible thing that again I thought was common knowledge and really shouldn't be, way back at the top of the show, Vance reminded me of the name of the performance art group that wires up dead animal corpses into robots and has them fight. And they are called Survival Research Laboratories. Survival Research. I'm just going to briefly read the top of the Wikipedia article. Survival Research Laboratories is an American performance art group that pioneered the genre of large-scale machine performance. Founded in 1978 by Mark Pauline. The group is known in particular for their performances where custom-built machines, often robotic, compete to destroy each other. The performances, described by one critic as, quote, noisy, violent, and destructive, unquote, are noted for the visual and oral cacophony created by the often dangerous interactions of the machinery.
Wow.
So they're not talking about the use of animals. I guess most recently in 2006, they performed a scene called Ghostly Scenes of Infernal Desecration in San Jose, and the performance featured an air launcher, a hovercraft, and a shockwave cannon.
I got it. I really want to see one of these shows now. This sounds fantastic.
That's cyberpunk right there.
Yeah, now that's cyberpunk now. Yeah.
Right. And again, that came up because I think the sketches from the lead person's sketchbook were used as the cover for that Storming the Reality Studio book that I just adored. I just adored back in '92. So that was on my mind. That was on my mind when I was in college. A lot of that stuff, and what's it like to use your bodies in new weird ways that haven't been seen before.
my final thought is that you should definitely buy 2400. I really think it only costs like $5, and the way it is written, there's what
you get like 12 games or 15 games.
It's more than that. I really think it could be 24 games, and they are written in such a way that it's really easy to pick. Like, each game tends to have one mechanical setting or setting mechanic to it, and you could easily steal those and stick and shove them all together on your own, or stick them into a different game. It's a really, I think, modular kind of thing, and there's a lot of good stuff in there, even if you're not running 2400 specifically.
Yeah. Do you have the page open right now, Max? I just think we should credit the author, whose name I'm blanking on.
It's Jason Tachi.
Jason Tachi, thank you. Yeah, definitely. I second that. Big recommend. It's an awesome read through and really good rules.
I'm actually in chat. Put that up.
Yeah, and back just put the link in chat to drive from RPG.
Damn, so did I.
Thank you.
He linked it? Wow. All right, well, I totally failed. I have no idea. All right.
He's the pro.
I should stay out. Yeah,
he's the pro at that, Max.
Yeah, yep. All right.
He's the best.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, so much for joining. Thank you for your questions and your chat. This was a great Q&A episode.
Thanks for running the game. It was really fun.
Yeah, thank you guys for playing. Stay tuned in the Discord and watch the channels for what's happening next on TDR. We're in a bit of a flux spot right now, so whatever happens next will surely be exciting. Thank you guys for joining.
And while you're doing that, don't forget to tune in to the Wandering DMs talk show on Sunday. This Sunday, we have special guest Spencer Crittenden, who was the game master on the Harmon Quest TV show with Dan Harmon, of course. And he has a podcast currently and is producing D&D content on YouTube. So Paul and I will be interested in speaking to Spencer on Sunday and hear his experiences GMing on a very public venue for a very short amount of time at a time, and see how different it was to GM in those kinds of games. So I'm personally really excited to speak to Spencer Crittenden on this Sunday at 1 p.m.
Yeah, definitely check that out.
If I can wake up by 1 p.m., I really want to watch that live because I like Harmon Quest, but it's a tough sell.
Max, join us and get your questions in the live chat, and we'll get them to Spencer on the fly, and we'll see.
Great. I'll donate too, so I can get the pop-up message. Yeah.
With a super chat.
Yeah, on super chat. I'm going to super chat him.
There you go. It's good policy. Good plan.
All right. Well, again, thank you everybody for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Good night, everybody.
Good night.